Let me start with a quick story. A candidate once told me this was the question that completely derailed their interview. Everything was going fine until the interviewer asked, "You work at a social media company. How would you design a system to detect unsafe content?" He knew the concepts. He had built models before, but under pressure, his answer turned into a long, unstructured monologue, and they never recovered. If that sounds familiar, this episode is for you. Today, we're going to break down how to answer this question the way interviewers actually want to hear it, clearly, confidently, and at the right level of depth for senior and principal data science interviews. Not textbook answers, not buzzwords, but real system-level thinking. All right, Jordan, let's jump right in. Suppose you work at a social media platform with strict content compliance rules. How would you design a machine learning system to detect unsafe content?
The first thing I'd call out is that unsafe content usually makes up a very small percentage of all content. So right away, this becomes a class imbalance problem, and that influences nearly every design decision.
So, before models or tools, what's the first thing you'd clarify?
I'd start by clearly defining what unsafe actually means. Are we talking about hate speech, violent imagery, explicit content, or misinformation? Each of these categories has different data requirements and often different modeling approaches.
Once that definition is clear, how do you think about data?
Data collection is critical. You need enough representative examples for each unsafe category, which is often harder than collecting safe content. If coverage is weak here, the model will have blind spots later.
And pre-processing depends on the content type, right?
Exactly. For text, that usually means normalizing language, handling noise and tokenization. For images, it's about standardizing sizes, formats, and sometimes color spaces. From there, feature extraction follows. Text models often rely on embeddings or linguistic signals, while image models use convolutional features and visual pattern detection.
What about model choice?
For text, transformer-based models like BERT tend to work well. For images, convolutional neural networks are the standard choice. This part is iterative. You experiment, evaluate, and refine based on performance and constraints.
How do you evaluate success, especially with such imbalanced data?
Accuracy alone can be misleading here. I'd focus on precision, recall, and F1 scores and use techniques like resampling, class weighting, or probability threshold tuning to make sure we're actually catching unsafe content.
Any final considerations before deployment?
Two big ones: bias and compliance. Bias training data can cause real harm, and global platforms need to comply with privacy laws and regulations across different regions. Once the system is deployed, monitoring is essential. User feedback on false positives and false negatives becomes a key input for continuous improvement.
That makes a lot of sense. Let's zoom in on class imbalance for a moment. What techniques would you typically use to handle it?
There are three common approaches. First, oversampling, where we increase the number of minority class examples, sometimes using synthetic techniques like SMOTE. Second, undersampling, where we reduce the number of majority class examples to balance the dataset. Third, class weighting, where we assign higher penalties to mistakes on unsafe content during training. We can also adjust the probability threshold to make the model more sensitive to unsafe content.
What are the main trade-offs between oversampling and undersampling?
Oversampling can lead to overfitting and increased training time, especially if synthetic samples are too similar to existing data. Undersampling risks throwing away valuable information from the majority class, which can hurt generalization. In practice, teams often use a hybrid approach, light oversampling combined with careful undersampling, depending on the dataset and imbalance severity.
Great insights. Any final advice for candidates listening?
Yes, this is the right level of depth for an interview answer. Start structured, explain your reasoning, and pause. If the interviewer wants more technical depth, they'll ask.
Perfect. Thanks for joining us, Jordan.